I am here with my good friend Miranda, and we are here to talk about a book that she wrote called Out of Darkness, an autobiography of hope. And I met Miranda when I was a pastor in Troy, Idaho, and I learned that she has quite an incredible story to share. And just a warning, as we get started, this story involves religious trauma and sexual abuse. And so if you are sensitive to that, just be forewarned. But I think this is a really important story, and I'm so glad that Miranda wrote this book and is willing to share with us. Miranda, to get started, could you just tell us a little bit about the family that you grew up in and what life was like for you as a kid?
Yeah, so I grew up in a family that, I thought it was normal. We moved a lot, and at first I thought moving was fun, and then I decided moving wasn't fun after, you start doing it a lot. We did not do very much school, so my mom thought that schooling was, modern schooling was bad, so we did homeschooling, and it only lasted for a little bit, and then when I hit, just before I got to 4th grade, she decided it was just too much work, so we quit schooling altogether. And all our summers were spent working with my parents. Like, the two of them would work on construction, and we would go with them, and they'd have us picking up roofing shingles and digging out from under houses, and I don't know, whatever they were doing. Sometimes you just had to sit next to like a tree or something and wait for them to finish because people didn't want you in their yard, or
What was the reason that you guys moved so much, would you say?
Well, we moved a lot because a couple of reasons. My mom thought the government was coming after her, and she thought if she moved often they couldn't find us, like CPS. And the other reason was because she thought it cured problems. Like, if she had, some trauma that came up, she thought moving was going to fix the problem, and so she would tell us it was time to move. Or like if she knew too many people in town, she'd say too many people knew us and it was time for us to move again. Yeah.
And you told me sometimes, like, when the idea that CPS was after you, what did your parents say in response to that? Like, so they just thought
They said that my mom's parents had turned us into CPS and that we needed to hide from them because they were trying to take us away from my parents. And as a kid, that really scared me. Like, I didn't want to be taken away from my parents. I didn't know any different,
Mm-hmm.
You don't know what they're going to do. They tell stories about kids, being mistreated. I didn't know, what was going to happen, but I just didn't want to be taken away from my parents. So I was all into the hiding. Even down to getting to change our names. They let us pick out names. We got to pick out new names that we wanted, and we never officially changed them, but get introduced to people when you get introduced under your new name, and we tell people that was our name, and we did that for 6 months where we just had different names, and you learned to come to that name when mom would call you by that name, and you learned to ask, talk to each other by those names. And I was only like 9, so I thought that was kind of cool. Like, we were in a spy movie, although I didn't watch spy movies, but we were sneaking around, and it didn't get so cool when we were older, but yeah.
It was just, you were normal. You didn't know any different. You
Yeah.
thought this is just the way that life is. You didn't have schooling, you didn't have education, and you worked and moved around a lot. And you thought that was just the reality that was for most people.
Yeah, and when I was younger, I didn't have too many friends, so I just kind of figured, and the few friends that I did know, that, like my husband's family, they were all homeschooled, and so I just thought that was what, that's what people did. The other worldly people went to school, but, godly people didn't, type of thing, It was a lot of religious prejudice, like thinking we were so much better than everybody else because we didn't go to church, and we didn't go to, we didn't go to schools, and we didn't socialize with all the worldly people, and yeah.
What was your religious background?
So both my parents were raised Adventist, Seventh-day Adventist, and then both my mom and dad weren't Adventists when they got married, and then when I was 2, my mom decided to, she started studying big time, and she decided that they were going to go back to religion, and I think she kind of just drug my dad along. I don't know if the story is that he saw her change and he wanted to change too and be like she was. I don't know if that's how it was or not because, I don't know. I was only 2, so. But my mom said that I reminded her because she'd been reading the Bible to me, and I told her that we need to wear dresses all the time, and so that's when, from 2 on, we wore dresses all the time. They had to be like 6 inches from your ankle, and you had to wear socks that would cover up your ankle because you wouldn't want to tempt the men by showing your ankles.
And so you would have stood out by the way that you dressed and looked unique from the places that you were living. And what were some of the places that you were living, like areas, states?
So we lived in Illinois for a little while, and my parents actually helped build for the guy who wrote the National Sunday Law book. I can't remember his name, but he had a giant shopping mall that my dad turned into church/offices and like Sabbath school rooms and stuff like that. And they had a like soundproof room where they did videoing and stuff. And anyway, he did that until they got mad at each other, and just right before it was finished, then we left. And then we mostly lived in the Northwest, like Washington, Idaho, Oregon. Yeah.
Yeah. And with the religious intensity that your parents had, there was some interesting health practices and beliefs that you write about in your book. Could you tell us a little bit about like what your mom did and believed in regards to her health practices?
Yeah, so when I was 6, my mom thought she had cancer. And being 6, I don't know if she ever went to see a doctor. I mean, I'd really love to know if she actually did, because she said she was diagnosed with lymphoma and she had 6 months to live. And I mean, as a kid, I thought my mom was dying, like we were going to be losing her. And she'd stay in bed all day long. And my brother and I would just go off and do I don't know what, because she wasn't watching us. And then she got into herbs big time, and then hydrotherapy and her enemas that she'd do. And she would mix up all these concoctions of herbs. The house would sometimes smell good and sometimes it'd smell awful. And she thought she was curing her cancer. And like after 6 months, when she said she was supposed to be dying, dead, she said she was cured. So after all that, and the hydrotherapy treatments is when she would get her temperature. She'd go in a bathtub and get her temperature, like I think it was 104, and she'd hold it for 30 minutes at 104, and then she would douse like buckets of ice water over herself, or have somebody do it. Like at the time we were still going to church, so the church members would come over and dump ice water on her, and then she'd have a sheet. She'd already gotten wet and she'd frozen, and she'd get it out and wrap it around herself, and then she'd go lay with a whole bunch of blankets over her, and she'd like sweat out the toxins, and she said that's what cured her cancer. I mean, she'd do one of those maybe 2 or 3 a week, I think. So.
And at times, other people would even come for the treatments.
Yeah, when I got older, that was when I was like 10. She did treatments. She said she cured a lady of hepatitis B. I have no idea. And then she had several other people that came to her. She had one lady when, that was when I was a teenager. She came because she thought she had cancer, like legitimately she had cancer. And my mom was supposed to cure her, but the lady didn't. My mom said she didn't follow all the things she was supposed to do, so therefore she didn't get healed. And the lady got mad and left because, it was a whole mess. It's in my book about how her grandson got hurt, and they got upset and they left early. So my mom said it's because she didn't want to cure herself, or, get cured. Like she didn't want to try hard enough.
Didn't do all the recommendations that she outlined.
Yeah, I mean, my mom would have them drinking like garlic juice, because she'd have a Champion juicer and she'd juice garlic and carrots and apples, and then she'd have all these different herbs they had to drink, and they had pills they had to take, and the enemas they had to do, and the hydrotherapy they had to do. And I mean, when there was snow on the ground, she'd have you get in the hot tub and then go out and sit in the snow. I mean, I did that a few times. That was interesting. But
and you described one time with the hot and cold treatment that went pretty extreme for you, that your mom had you do.
I mean, I don't really remember it. All I remember is my mom giving me the treatment and putting me to bed, and like when she gave me the treatment, I was terrified because I like hot baths, but I don't like being held in there, and she like held me down to keep my temperature up, and I was like freaking out. I think I screamed and kicked, and I don't know, probably was a naughty 8-year-old. But anyway, my mom took me and put me in bed, and a little bit later she came and she was like hovering over me, and there was other people there hovering over me, and she said that I'd passed out. Now whether I did or not, I have no idea, because I mean, who knows when they pass out? I don't know. Maybe you do when you're an adult, but as a kid, I had no idea. And then she got mad. I mean, first she was worried, and then she got mad because she said I had eaten too much sugar. And at the time, she loved to diagnose. Like my brother, she had all of these different things. Like she said he was autistic, and like he's definitely not autistic, but she said he had learning disabilities and all this stuff. Well, then she said I had diabetes, diabetes. So that she said the sugar had caused me to go into the coma. She didn't say, or not a coma, but passing out or whatever.
Well, and I think you described, she blamed it, like you weren't even allowed to have jam.
No, I'd eaten jam, and she said I knew better. I wasn't allowed to, because it was at my grandma's house. My grandma said yes, and I went and ate it, and I wasn't supposed to have it. And
the idea being because jam has sugar.
Yeah.
And that would,
Which is weird, because, my mom would do that thing where sometimes it was allowed. Like, we'd have margarine in our house, and we could eat it one day, and then the next day my mom would scream that we were all going to go to hell and throw it away. And it was kind of like the jam thing. Like, sometimes we would pick fruit, and we'd make jam, and we'd eat it, and then halfway through eating it, she'd be yelling at you for eating it because it had sugar in it. So I don't know, it's very confusing growing up, because you're never like quite sure where is it good or is it bad. One day it's good, next day it's bad, then the next day it's good, the next day it's bad, and you're just never sure where the line is.
Yeah, and you're just 8 years old trying to figure out the world and reality.
Yeah.
And meanwhile your mom is doing things like even cayenne enemas.
Yeah, she did cayenne enemas.
You talk in the book about one time, so your family didn't really go on vacation.
No.
But what happened one time that you got to go on a vacation for a few days? What happened in that situation?
Yeah, and then that's when she decided to do a cleanse, and she had us all drinking all this, I don't know, juices and stuff, and taking this stuff that's supposed to get worms out. 'Cause she was on a kick like my whole life, thinking that we all had worms. Who knows? Maybe we do. I don't know. But she said she lost a whole bunch of worms, and she was sure we were going to lose worms. Well, I don't never remember losing worms, but we sure were on the toilet. You were either throwing up or you had diarrhea the entire weekend. So, and it was like self-inflicted. It wasn't like we had some virus or something. It was all caused by the stuff she was feeding us. And I don't remember what it was, but something that was supposed to clean our systems out.
During a vacation, good times.
Yeah, definitely.
So you grew up in the Adventist church, but it was an extreme view because of your mom's fanaticism. Tell us a little bit, what was your view about God, Ellen White, and the church as you were being formed within this environment?
So, we didn't stay in the church very long. When I was 8, my mom and dad got into a fight, and then my mom started thinking that Ellen White had left the church. She said there was proof that she had left late in her life, and that she would be encouraging everybody else to leave the church, and that if you wanted to go to heaven, you would leave the church. In fact, she said the only way you could step foot in an SDA church and not go to hell is if you were in a prominent preaching position. Like, she'd walk in one to preach or something, but she doesn't want to walk in one without a preaching position because she will go to hell. Strange. But so yeah, I grew up with from 8 on not going to church unless she was doing some sort of concert or preaching engagement, which we did later on when I was a teen. But I always was taught God was like, I always thought of him as like a giant tyrant, like up in heaven, striking people dead, and kind of like an Old Testament, I guess, version of people getting swallowed up and stuff. And I don't know, I always pictured Jesus like sitting there begging and pleading at his feet to save people. And my mom also said that God's going right now through like he has been for years, she says, through the book of life. And he's doing it alphabetical. Now, I don't know why she thinks that, but okay. So he's going through it alphabetical, and if he's come to your name, that's it. You're still alive. So, but if you were good at that moment, then you get to go. And if you're dead or you're not good, then you don't get to go, and it's already too late for you. That was always strange to me, because I don't know, when is he get? If your last name starts with an A, he's already gone through the A's. Then too bad for you. I don't know. That just didn't seem very fair to me, especially as I got older. When I was little, I just took it as gospel truth. That's just how it is. And I was really glad growing up, I had a last name that was further in the alphabet, so I was like, it's going to take him a while to get to me if there's a lot of names, so I have a chance for a while. But yeah, weird.
And being good within your mom's understanding of religion included things like not eating jam, chocolate, and making sure that your dress covered your entire body. When was the first time that you had chocolate?
Yeah, I was 25 the first time I had chocolate. And my mom went to the Philippines, and she told me this whole way of how they made chocolate, and she said it was good that we didn't eat chocolate, because she said that they would break open the cocoa beans and then stomp on it. She said the rats and pigs would come eat it and stuff. And then after it sat and dried out for a while with all the rats and pigs coming through it, they'd pick it up and they'd go, Now, I don't know if that's how they actually do it, but she said that's how they made chocolate. And she said that was a good reason why. One of the good reasons why we didn't eat chocolate. Plus, she said it was addictive. Same like with you couldn't have mustard or black pepper, which is strange to me because cayenne pepper, so red pepper was allowed, like, her enemas, and she'd have us eat it, and she'd even have it in capsules where you would take them. But black pepper wasn't, because she said black pepper is an irritant to the stomach. Now, as an adult, I've had both black and red pepper, and I'm like, which one's hotter? The red pepper is by far hotter, so I don't know how the black pepper irritates your stomach more than the red pepper. But, yeah, so, and then pickles. There was a whole book about, she had like all these stories about how eating pickles will turn you into alcoholic, so you couldn't have pickles or, anything that was like fermented. Although sometimes when she was on her kicks, she would make her own sauerkraut and kimchi, and we could eat that, and that was okay. But then, sometimes it wasn't. So that's strange.
Yeah. So there's these inconsistencies.
Yeah.
It's taking writings and letters of Ellen White and making them into gospel, but except sometimes you apply it, sometimes you don't. And there was things that even like in regards to when you could and could not drink water, right?
Yeah, like you couldn't drink it an hour before your meal, I think, or maybe it's half an hour before your meal, and then an hour after, I think it was. And you couldn't drink any liquid, like you can't drink liquid. So juice, let's say there was juice on the table or wherever you were, you couldn't drink the juice during your meal. You could drink it as like a supper, but you couldn't drink it with your meal because she said it would dilute your food and then mess up the juices, the natural whatever in your stomach. So yeah, you weren't allowed to be drinking juice. But if you want to drink juice, let's say you wanted grape juice, that's fine. You just don't eat anything. You drink it like it's kind of like water, although it wasn't encouraged to like drink lots of juice because it's got too much sugar in it, But yeah.
So it was a fear-based religion.
Yeah.
You didn't serve God because he's so good and wonderful and you love him. You served him because if you don't, you're going to be squished like a bug.
Yeah. I mean, even now they have a book of 100 sins, and it's things like you didn't kneel down to pray. That was a big thing with my parents. You kneeled down, you closed your eyes, you folded your hands. You didn't just that sitting was so rude. My mom said sometimes to go to churches, the people would sit to pray or stand up. She would kneel every time because that's the only way you can pray is by kneeling, closing your eyes, folding your hands. And then she had certain ways. You couldn't say, Dear Jesus. You had to say, Heavenly Father or something, because she said, Dear Jesus was for little kids, and we weren't little kids anymore, when I got older. So, yeah, just strange.
And what's obvious for anyone that reads this book or has interacted with religious fanaticism to this level, this doesn't make your mom more generous, kind, and loving. It makes a restrictive home that's totally fear-based.
Yeah, and I grew up judging people. I mean, you see someone walk down the street and they have tattoos or rings or earrings or any type of jewelry, and you just immediately think, well, they're evil, they're bad, they're going straight to hell. Which now as an adult, it just makes me cringe because I'm just like, you don't know what they're going through, or, you don't know why they have tattoos, or, why are we judging people like that? And it's still hard for me to, as humans, we judge so easily. But then growing up your entire life just automatically judging people off the way they looked or something they said, or it's hard to not automatically judge because that's how you grow up, is judging people.
Yeah, and maybe we can transition to this next part. It makes you hide things that you should really get help for and open up in a way that can bring healing. So tell us a little bit, and this is the part where we can get into the trigger warning aspect of your relationship with your brother as you were kids. What started to happen as your parents were hyper-focused on their religion and their music and all of these things, and how did you end up becoming pregnant?
Yeah, so I have in the book the story of when my mom she recorded a CD, like her first CD, when she thought she was dying. She said she has a nice voice, or at least some people think she does, and she wanted to record a CD so everybody would have something to remember her by. And when they were doing that, obviously the house had to be super quiet, and we lived in a trailer house, and those things aren't very quiet, so they would banish us to the far end of the trailer house and tell us to be very quiet. And they would close us in the room, and you didn't dare come out until they told you could come out. So we were in there like pretty much every Sabbath afternoon for, I don't know, however long it took them to make the CD, trying to be quiet. And in the book I tell about how one day my brother, and at the time we were only 3 and 5, and my brother had to go to the bathroom. And I don't know I mean, there was some sexual stuff before, I think, and I'm not exactly sure because I don't remember. This is just the first instance I remember that he decided he was going to pee in me because I didn't have to pee. And so there was experimenting there, and it didn't work out, and it was like he got the bed wet. And we lied to my mom because somehow we knew that probably wasn't the right thing to be doing, and told her it was just water, and somehow she believed that. And then the next time we were in there together, he wanted to try it because he wanted to see if he could like make it work for another time. And that's when my parents came in. And as a 5-year-old, I could never figure out at the time exactly what we'd done wrong. I mean, I knew we were probably doing something wrong because my parents were screaming and yelling, and my mom had to strip off all our clothes, and they took us to the living room, and they just beat us with a belt for a while, like naked. And I remember laying there thinking, they were mad. We had some clothes off, and we were kind of playing with each other's privates, and now they have us completely naked in front of each other, and I'm not sure like why we're getting spanked, because if they were mad about us being naked, why did they take the rest of our clothes off, type of thing. So it was very confusing to me. I didn't understand it. Nobody explained what we were doing wrong. Not that I can remember. I just remember being screamed and yelled at, and my brain just kind of, I mean, when you're a kid and people are screaming and yelling, most of the time you just shut off and think, well, when they're done screaming and yelling, maybe life will get back to normal. And so, yeah, that just kind of started a whole mess of, yeah, my brother sexually messing with me. And I think all the way up until I was 11, I kind of went along with it just because I didn't know anything different. And nobody explained to me why it was bad. I just thought, there were things you weren't supposed to do. Like sometimes I'd sneak food from my, parents. We weren't allowed to eat between meals, and sometimes I'd eat between meals. And I knew it was wrong, but I'd do it. I don't know, as kids, stuff is wrong, but I never got a good reason as to why it was wrong until I was 11 and we moved to a place where there was a kid who was, I guess my parents definitely saw he was interested in me, and they kind of gave me a sex talk. Not really a sex talk, but enough for me to put two and two together and figure out, oh, hey, this is why they were so mad. Like, I understand now. And that's when I decided I want to get baptized, because I thought because I went to my brother and I talked to him, and I'm like, hey, look, this is wrong, and this is why this is wrong. Like, this isn't how this is supposed to be. And he just laughed at me, and he just said, you're stupid. And I was like, well, okay, if I take a big stand and say I want to get baptized and I want to follow Jesus, this will get it to all end. Like, he'll stop. That was my main reason for getting baptized, was thinking, I thought if he saw me want to stand up for God. So I made a big stand. Like, Mom had a big thing about not having novels in our house. We never had novels, but I had all kinds of other storybooks in my room, and she had me take them out and burn them because I was making a big stand and I was following Jesus. I wasn't going to read anything bad for me. And then I got baptized, and I thought this stand I was making was going to prove to him that I was done and that was going to be it. But that didn't work. That's when he just started taking advantage. And if he didn't, if I said, hey, no, I don't want to do this, he just beat me up. And he did that for a while. Like, he would kick, punch, slap, whatever, until he just gave him what he wanted. And then there was a guy who came to visit us, and he had 4 boys, and he was watching my brother beat up on me one day, and he told my dad, hey, you shouldn't let your son beat up on your daughter. And my dad said, oh, they'll grow out of it. And he said, oh, no, they won't. He needs to learn some, boundaries here. He shouldn't be beating up on her. And so he went and talked to him, apparently. And after that, my brother never hit me, but he did, he'd already learned the mind manipulation. And I don't know, unless you've, been around somebody that has that mind manipulation, you don't get how much it takes over your brain. He would do things like tell lies. I mean, he was really good at lying, so he would make up a story about something I'd supposedly done, and my parents would punish me for it. And sometimes I did it, sometimes I didn't, sometimes he did it and blamed it on me. And I just knew you gave him whatever he wanted, so you didn't get it. Because usually, I'd end up getting punished by my parents, and I tried to stay out of trouble the best I could. So I learned to give him whatever he wanted. If he wanted me to do a job for him, I'd do it, because he was really good about making me do his chores. Dad would say, go bring in the firewood, and he would say, you go do that. So I'd bring the firewood, or I'd give him sex, or whatever he wanted, just to keep peace, or not get picked on, or beat up.
You tell a story in the book that I think exemplifies this point well, in regards to the four-wheeler incident.
Yep.
Can you describe what happened there with your brother?
Yeah, so so we had a speed limit. We got a 4-wheeler when we lived on the ranch, and we weren't allowed to go over 20 miles an hour. That was the rule if we could drive the 4-wheeler. Well, the ranch was huge. I mean, hundreds of it was 3,000 acres, so, a lot of room. So one day he was caught going over the speed limit, and my parents said he couldn't drive it for, I think it was like 2 weeks or something. Well, we were supposed to go out and feed all these guard dogs that they had out with like the sheep, and you just drive out to them and dump out their food and leave. And so we were driving out there, and as soon as we got past where the house could see us, he told me he was going to drive. And I was like, no, Mom and Dad said you couldn't drive. Like, that was the rule. You could come with me, but you can't drive. And he got really mad and just started whacking and hit me. And we got into like this gate that we had to drive through. And I thought, well, I can run faster than him, so I could always outrun him. So I just grabbed the keys and I ran. And I looked back to see if he was even coming after me. And I was like running up this hill, and he threw a rock and hit me in the middle of my face. I got this huge goose egg. And it was right then when I was like, okay, he's outsmarted me. And that's when he was still beating me up, So I just went back to the four-wheeler, handed him the keys, and the next 2 weeks he drove anytime we were out of sight of my parents. And I never told him because, I was afraid I was going to get punished, because that's usually how it rolled. Is he was just so good at lying, he was probably going to say that I was lying, and then, that was that. So yeah, and that was the kind of thing that he would manipulate me with, is, when he was supposed to be getting punished or whatever, then he would some good get away with it. And his lying skills, like, they were just so good. I would stand there and watch him tell horrible stories to my mom and knew it was a bold-faced lie, and watch my mom gobble it up, and I just couldn't understand how he could do that, because even now I'm a terrible liar. Like, I just can't do it, which is probably a good thing. But
And he was never held accountable.
no, he did get in trouble as a kid. He got in trouble quite a bit, but there was a lot of stuff he could just lie his way out of and say I did it, or say he didn't do it, or whatever. And yeah, I have another story in my book when I was older, with him with the dog that he shot and then lied to my parents about it. And I was always shocked that my parents would believe. He had them believing that some guy had stolen his dog, and we'd go to the house, and we even spied on him for several hours, around the corner, snuck up to his house, and were trying to see if we could find this dog that my brother had shot and killed and shoved over a cliff. So I don't know. I was just shocked that my parents were even believing the stuff he was peddling, and that they could
Well, let's get into it. Your brother actually also slept with animals, and that background behind him shoving his dog over the cliff, he told you something that he believed happened to his dog. Can you describe us a little bit about his bestiality, and then what he told you about what he believed about the dog?
Yeah, so he started out with sheep when we lived on the ranch. He said they were perfect, and one time I did catch him with the sheep, and I think I almost threw up, because that to me was just beyond gross. I don't even know how anybody thinks about doing something like that, let alone trying it. But yeah, and then he bragged to me later on that he tried just about every animal we had. I caught him with my horse one time, and he said he tried the chickens, the cats, the dogs, and that was the reason he shot his dog, is because he literally thought he'd gotten his dog pregnant. And I'm not exactly sure why he thought he got his dog pregnant, but yeah, he shot it because he didn't want the chance of puppies being born, or whatever it would have been if he... Yeah. And who knows? Maybe the dog got pregnant by something else. I have no idea. But whatever the case was, yeah, he shot her and shoved her over the cliff, and then, yeah, made up the lie that the dog had been stolen. And yeah, and it was weeks we spent calling that dog and searching for that dog before we finally quit. And the whole time she was over the cliff. Yeah.
Which brings up the next thing. So you know all of this background, you know his manipulation, his ability to lie and do whatever it takes to get what he wants. And then it ends up that you get pregnant. Tell us a little bit about what that was like for you, and then ultimately what happened with the birth.
Yeah, so yeah, I did end up pregnant when I had a broken leg, and I'd been told to go out and help him with firewood, and he'd actually left me alone for a while there, and so this was the first time I had it written down. I knew exactly when it happened. And yeah, I was really freaked out when I found out I was pregnant, because that had been for a while. Once I'd figured out how things worked, that I was scared I was going to get pregnant, and obviously there wasn't anything being done about it. One time my mom had somebody tell her she should put me on birth control for period issues, and she said there was no way I needed that. So, yeah, I was completely terrified, and I didn't know who to talk to, or for the first 3 months I faked myself into thinking I wasn't pregnant. I even called an abortion clinic and asked them if they thought I was pregnant, and they were like, just go get a test, but I don't think you are, because you've had some light periods and you're just stressed out and you need to stop stressing and Well, I was too scared to get a test because I was afraid someone was going to see me, because we did know a lot of people in town because we had already been there 4 or 5 years. And so I knew quite a few people because of doing my horse business and stuff. And I didn't want to get back to my parents, so I just never bought a test. I just kept telling myself that I was just stressed out or whatever until 4 months when I felt kicking. And then I knew that it wasn't. And that's when I started trying to get rid of it. Like, I tried the herbs, and my parents had these big, thick manuals on herbs, and I took all the different ones. I took a whole bottle of vitamin C one time because I read that vitamin C did the trick. And of course, by then, 4 months along, it's kind of hard to. Yeah, I probably was just doing nothing, but.
And your brother had an idea of how to get rid of it too, right?
Yeah, he wanted to stick a knitting needle up me and see if he could, like, make it come out that way. And that was one thing I was like, no way, you're not sticking anything like that. I don't want to. And then he did jokingly say one time, and I didn't put this in the book, but he jokingly said he could shoot me like he shot his dog. And I actually was terrified that he was going to try it because, he didn't want to get caught. And then he told me that I could just have it and, like, kill it or something. And I truly didn't think it was going to be born alive. I really thought that there would be something wrong with it. It would come out preterm. It would be teeny tiny, and it would, I could, like, put it in the garbage can or something. It's horrible to say, but that's just what I just imagined.
How old were you and your brother at that point?
So I was 18 at the time, and he would have been 16.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So then you start to have this baby grow. At what point does family discover? How did that all work?
Yeah, so I hid it really well. Like, I didn't get very big. I was tiny at the time, and I wore bulky sweaters. And then when my dresses didn't fit anymore, like, I was making my own dresses, so I just made them a little bit bigger and didn't tell anybody that I was making them bigger. And between my bulky sweaters, and I would suck my stomach in as much as I could anytime I was around people. And my mom thought I was gaining some weight. Like, around 8 months, she put me on a diet. She had me eating 2 cups of food per meal and running, which I always hated running, but running when you're pregnant, it's not exactly fun. And yeah, I kind of despised my mom quite a bit because she'd had my little brother just 3 years before, and she wouldn't, like, bend over and wash the floor. She couldn't put her shoes on, things like that. And I was scrubbing the floor every week and doing, like, all this stuff. I trained horses up until like almost 9 months, and still riding and doing all my stuff. And so sometimes I was just kind of a little angry because I was like, Mom, you kind of babied yourself a little bit. And but then I remembered that she didn't even know I was pregnant, so what was there to be mad about? Like, that was kind of my fault for not telling. But I was terrified to tell. Like, I knew it was bad enough. You just didn't get pregnant out of not being married, and then you didn't definitely not getting pregnant with your brother. That was even worse. And so then on a Thursday I went into labor, and I just wasn't too bad. I just felt like starting twinges, and I was like, oh, this is fine, I can make it. And then Thursday night I couldn't sleep. I ended up sleeping with my head, like, on a headboard. Like, there was this wider headboard I had on my bed, and I could put my arms and my head on it, and I kneeled all night. And that's how I slept Thursday night. Not much sleep, but. And then all day Friday it was getting worse and worse, and by Friday night, I think it was around 10, I just, like, I couldn't do anymore. Like, I needed to tell somebody. And so I went in. My mom was sleeping, and my dad was, like, downstairs studying or something. He was going to do a sermon for something or other. And so I woke up my mom, and I told her I was pregnant and, like, I was having a baby. And I don't really remember the conversation, like, how I approached it or anything, but I remember her screaming and yelling and taking me downstairs and telling my dad, and my dad being mad. And then I remember them telling me that if they took me to the hospital, that they'd probably lock me up in jail and take my baby away from me. Well, that was scary, so I didn't want to go to the hospital. And then after the fact, they told people that there was a snowstorm, but there wasn't a snowstorm. They just didn't want me going to the hospital, I guess, which is weird because then 12 hours later, they did take me to the hospital. So I never understood why it was okay.
It's that fear reactionary religion, right? Of not wanting to look bad.
I guess.
Every excuse.
Yeah.
Now describe the baby's coming.
Yeah.
How did it come out? What happened?
So my my mom wanted my brother to be there. She said since he'd caused the problem, he needed to be there. And I was like, please, no. And then he just flat out told her no and went back to bed. And I was very glad he did that because I didn't want to deal with any more. It was enough already. And my dad's like, well, you check and see how far along she was. And then my mom screamed and yelled and almost passed out. She can't stand the sight of blood. Just funny because she wanted to be a nurse when she was younger, she said. But then my dad took over and pretty much delivered my baby. And I mean, from 10, she was born at 1 o'clock in the morning, but from 10 to 1, it went by really fast. Like, to me, it felt like it went by really fast just with all the stuff that was like, drama, my parents being really upset. And my mom wanted me to have it on the kitchen table, but then my back hurt so bad, they took me off and they got me like this chair that didn't have a seat in it. It was just like a hole in the middle, and that thing was like, it was like rough wood. So it's like poking me. And so then my mom ended up like putting her arms underneath me and like holding me while my dad like grabbed the baby. And then when it started coming out, my mom freaked out because she was like still in the sack, like the sack didn't pop. So my mom was like screaming push. So then I ended up ripping really bad because she just like popped out. And after she like came out, then the sack broke. That was kind of cool. But yeah.
Not everybody's home birth, it's stories.
No. Yeah. It was a little weird having my dad delivering my baby. And then, I don't know, after I had her, it was like, I don't know, everything kind of for a minute there, it was like nothing mattered. Like, this baby had made it through hell. I felt like it was just her and me. We'd made it through a lot of stuff. I tried to get rid of her, and she stuck in there. All of a sudden, I felt like she was going to make it, and we were going to fight our way together. So when my parents, the next day, they wanted to tell people she was their kid, because they already had, my little brother that was 3 years older, so they were like, she'd fit in, nobody would know that my mom hadn't had her, because we didn't see people very often. We can just tell them they had another kid. And I was like, no way, because I don't want my parents raising, yeah, I was like, I've gone through this. I went through 9 months of hell. I'm not letting them raise her. I wouldn't let them take her.
Another detail that I think shows the dysfunctional dynamics of this. So you go to the hospital, but you're still really ripped from the trauma of the pregnancy.
Yeah. And
so what happened?
Then the doctor that came in happened to be the doctor that I had babysat his kids. So that was very awkward for me. And then he tells my dad, "Oh, it's too badly like ripped. It's been too long to like sew it up. Like it's too many hours. So it had been 12 hours later. It was like 1 o'clock the next day in the afternoon. So he's like, it'll heal up on eventually on its own. So just leave it alone." So then my dad takes me home and he tells my mom, he's like, "Well, I got lidocaine and I got all this stuff to sew it up. I'm just gonna sew it up and we'll see if it heals or not." And so then he tells me that he's sewing me up. So there I am facing him again, and him sewing me up. And when I first had my baby, he had called a midwife because they wanted a midwife to come. I think they thought she would just drop everything and come, but she had a schedule and she couldn't come. Well, a couple days later, she tells him she can come. So after he sewed me up, I think it was like a day later, she says, "Hey, I'm going to be coming over and I'll check on her." He was all afraid that somebody would get after him for sewing me up. So then he snipped the stitches and pulled them all back out. And then, of course, when she came, she just like talked to me about breastfeeding and never looked down there. So I was like, I was pretty annoyed, really, because the lidocaine, I mean, you didn't feel the stitches too bad, but getting lidocaine and then having all ripped out for nothing just kind of seemed pointless. Yeah.
Another thing that I think helps explain the dynamics that you had growing up, and then the protection that you had for your daughter. Let's ask it this way. You were disciplined in some kind of extreme ways growing up, and one time you left your little girl with your parents. They had a reaction of discipline. So let's start first of all. What was some of the most extreme discipline that you had as a kid growing up, and then we can get to that moment.
Oh yeah, so the thing of when I was 10, and they decided that I would get 40 lashes and my brother would get 39 every time we were in trouble, we were punished. And the one time that I remember thinking, hey, this might be extreme. I mean, I didn't talk to other kids to find out how badly their parents spanked them or whatever. But when my dad had me lean over this clawfoot tub we had, and he spanked me until he got tired, and then he called my mom to come finish, that's when I was thinking as a kid, this is too much when you have to switch out parents to do a punishment. And I don't even remember what I was getting punished for. I mean, it's not like those punishments stuck in my head. I remember the spanking, but I don't remember like what I did. And you'd have bruises up and down your legs and back. And
Another time you describe is you got placed into a dog kennel. Just tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll get into your daughter's situation.
yeah, so my mom one day got mad, and I never did figure out, even to this day, like what she was upset about, because she never told me. She just said, and I don't remember exactly what she said now. I think I have it in the book, but she marched me down to the dog kennel. I think she said she was sick about how the way we were acting or something, my brother and I, and she just told me to strip off all my clothes except my bra and underwear, and she put me in the doghouse and locked the door. You know, obviously they locked from the outside, and yeah, I was pretty freaked out. So I was 13 at the time, and I didn't know if she was going to leave me in there for a few hours or for days or weeks, or I had no clue. And I kind of like mentally freaked out. Now I know how a dog feels out when you lock them up. Maybe the dogs don't care. I don't know. But I like freaked out for a few minutes. Then I thought, I kind of like panicked. And then I was like, well, there's nothing I could do. I might as well just sit here. Like I looked around to see, is there a way I can escape out of this doghouse? But it was pretty escape proof. So I just kind of like curled up in the dog blanket, and because it was like around 40 degrees out that time. And I think I was only in there like an hour. It seemed like I was in there for weeks, but obviously I wasn't. And then she pulled me out, and she was like feeling all apologetic, and got me a warm blanket, and then like gave me a hot bath and brought me tea. And I could never figure out why she was being so apologetic until later I found out my dad was coming home for lunch, and she didn't want my dad to find out. Like she never told him. My brother finally told him several years later, and yeah, strange stuff.
Epiphany. So then let's transition. You're starting to bond with this little human that is your baby, and you want to give her protection so that what happened to you never happens to her. And you had her with you, but there was one day where you left her with the parents. Describe that circumstance.
Yeah, I was a dumb teenager that thought, well, leaving with my parents for a few hours while I go practice my violin with another student. We're going to do a duet. I thought that if I just left her for a few hours, it'd be okay. But when I got back, my mom said that as soon as I left, like drove out of the driveway, she started screaming. And my mom said she screamed the entire time. And they like spanked her, and they took a wet cloth and put it over her face to get her to stop crying. And she was 6 weeks old at the time. And my mom said she was a spoiled, rotten brat, and I needed to do something about it. And even as a teenager, I realized she wasn't a spoiled, rotten brat. Like she was 6 weeks old.
She's a baby.
She's a baby that maybe just wasn't feeling safe for obvious reasons. And that's when I determined I was not going to let my parents ever have her. I got a baby carrier, and that kid went with me. Like she was tied to me. If I went riding, she went riding with me. If I was going to my violin lesson, she went with me. And I cleaned house, she went with me. Like everything I did, she went with me. And then I heard my mom telling somebody, oh, she never lets me hold that baby. And I was like, that's perfect. That's what I want, because she doesn't need to be treated like that. Like who does that to a 6-week-old? I don't know.
Now, you eventually escaped and found freedom, and you wrote your parents a letter. Tell us a little bit about how you moved from this environment to be able to find independence and freedom.
Yeah, so my parents went on a mission trip to Africa, and they were going to be gone for, I don't remember, I think it was 3 weeks or something like that. Anyway, they wanted me and my little brother, who was 4 at the time, I think, and my baby to go and live with my grandparents while they were gone, so that my brother and I wouldn't be together, which was perfectly fine with me. I didn't want to stay there with him anyway. So, you want me to tell about leaving?
Yeah, tell about leaving. And so with your brother, did it stop after the baby?
No, so during the baby, while I was pregnant for a while, he kept raping me. And then after the baby, he left me alone for a year. And then after a year, he started back up again. And our parents tried to put rules in place after the baby was born to keep us apart. They could be upstairs and he would rape me downstairs, or they would be downstairs and he'd take me behind the house. And my dad said that it always happened like when we were far away, but it would happen right under their noses. And I just knew better than to like call out or something, because I knew that they were always on his side. It was always my fault. They said I was a slut. They said it was how I looked at him, like how I dressed. My mom says because I didn't wear long sleeves, I had short sleeves, and that, I didn't know how I looked. Like for a long time, I was scared about how I looked at different guys because I was afraid I gave them some look that made them think that I wanted sex because my mom said, "Oh, it's you gave him a look," and I just was like, "What look? Like, what did I do? I don't know." But yeah, so it continued after. And so when my parents left, my brother had to drive them to Seattle to go on the plane. And then he came back. And he rented some movies, which movies were off and on. It was one of those things where sometimes they were allowed and sometimes they weren't. And so it was a big deal when, you could watch movies. And so he got some movies. He's like, "Hey, let's watch some movies." And he's like, "Come sit on the couch." And I already put the kids to bed. So I was like sitting on the couch. And then he's like coming over to me and putting his arm around me and trying to get in my pants. And I was like, oh, he didn't want to watch a movie. He wants something completely different. And I'd promised my dad had said, "Hey, I want you nothing to happen while I'm gone." And I'd said, "It won't." So I told him, "Nope." And I just got up and I went to my room and I had a lock on my door. So I locked the door. And then he came up there and he was banging on the door and yelling. He says, "Just let me in." And I'm like, "Nope." And I told him through the door, Dad told me, made me promise. And I promised him that this wouldn't happen. And he said, "Oh, this would not be you. This would be me." And I was like, "Still, I don't care." Dad said, "No, I'm not, it's not going to happen." This was like the second time I'd ever like told him no, like I wasn't going to. The first time had just been a few days before when I like kind of stood up for myself, and all of a sudden I realized, hey, I can tell him no, and I can stand up for myself. I don't have to let him walk all over me. So the next morning I was supposed to leave, and I had the car loaded, and I had the kids in the car, and then my dad had left some papers I was supposed to get, so I went back into the house to get them, and my brother grabbed a hold of me and threw me down on our parents' bed and was trying to rape me. And I was like, "Hey, I didn't let anything happen last night. I can fight now." So I started punching and kicking and hitting him. First time I'd ever fought back. And then I managed to wiggle out from under him and I was headed for the stairs and he grabbed me and drugged me back again. And for a minute there I was kind of like, is it worth it? Like, is it worth it? Should I just lay here and let it happen or should I fight? And I thought, yeah, it's worth it. I've got kids down in the car. Like, there's something to fight for. And so I kicked and punched my way out of there and ran as fast as I could and hopped in the car, locked the doors, and drove out. And I don't know, that made me feel like I was really tough because I'd been able to like get away from him and not allow it to happen. And then when I was at my grandparents' house, they encouraged me. They're like, "Hey, you shouldn't move back at home. You should, leave home." And I'm like, "That's great with me. I don't want to go back home. Like, I wanted to leave as soon as I had my baby, with all the stuff my mom had done, because I kind of felt like it was hard living there because I was afraid she was going to do something to my baby. And so I'd wanted to leave for a while and wasn't sure, like, how does a single mom, like, find a place to live? I'd never lived on my own, so I wasn't sure how to do it. But when my grandparents said, "Hey, you should stay here if you want to," and I was like, "Yes, please." So yeah, I was terrified to tell my parents that I was leaving. So then I sent that email to my dad, which I can read.
Yeah, let's read that.
So I wrote, "Dear Dad, I hope your flight goes well and you land safely back in the States. I've decided to move away from home. Please don't think this is Grandma's fault. She did not make my decision for me. It's taken me quite a while to make my decision, but I think it's best, and will give you the reasons I believe it is best. I still have problems with John. I know Mom thinks it's my fault and I force him, but it's far from that. The short time I had to spend with him before I left for Grandma's house, he was a problem. No, I did not give in to him. I told him I had promised you I wouldn't, and he said, 'Oh, forget that. It wouldn't be you, it'd be me.' And I told him no, I would not give in. Thankfully, he didn't push it because he knew I meant what I said. And I didn't go into the whole fight with the bed because I just figured there was no point to it. Although sadly I've given in to his demands a couple of times since Mabel was born, I want it to stop now and I don't want to be around him alone ever again. So the best way to fix that is for me to leave. If you think I like what he does, I do not. And since I'm smaller than him, I feel like I have to let him have his way. My other reason for moving out is James with Mabel. We've caught him masturbating and I don't want a repeat of history. All what it would take is one time. I don't want a problem to a cure, and I don't wish Mabel around it. I know how hard a habit can be to break because I've had to fight it, and I don't want my precious baby having to struggle with the same thing. Those are my reasons for leaving. It isn't anything you've done, and I will miss you and Mom very much. Hopefully you won't mind if I come and visit you once in a while, because I'd like to. I would love to hear all about Africa and see all the pictures. Grandpa and Grandma said I can stay here till I find a place to live, which is nice of them. My plan is once I get the puppies all sold and my car fixed, I'll come and get my things, and Grandma will get some of them for me when she's up there. Of course, I will get my horse when I find a suitable spot. Thank you for everything, Dad. You've been the best father, and I hate to leave you, but I feel like this is something I need to do if I want my daughter and me to be in heaven. We must break all bad habits, no matter the cost." So it was really hard for me to leave because I grew up being told I wasn't supposed to leave until a guy come and handpicked me and took me away. And then after I had my daughter, I was told that because I wasn't a virgin anymore, I was not allowed to leave anymore. My job was to stay and take care of my parents the rest of my life. That was like what I was supposed to do. My dad said that the only way a daughter's allowed to leave is if some guy comes and gets you. And then if you can't get married, obviously no guy can come get you. So you just have to live there the rest of your life. So after my parents got home a few days later, I got this email from my dad.
Dear Miranda, if time were to last long enough that you will see Mabel leave home, you too would understand how we feel. Until then, you will have no idea of the hurt you have put us through. On our anniversary, I asked your mom, remind me, why did we ever want to raise a family? We have fought for 22 years to stay together as a family. I have had to leave every friend I ever had. I have had to stand against the government, churches, pastors, and even family to keep my family together. I've gone without much, worked many hours to make money needed, and kept my family safe. Yes, I have failed sometimes because I dared to trust pastor, family, or friend, and those I thought I could trust were the very ones who were some of my worst enemies. I guess all I can say is that you have done what you have done, and you too will have to learn the hard way what it takes to have a family. I at least had your mom. You are now, for now, alone. May I suggest you pray much, talk little, and think twice before doing anything. Because everything that you do, and I mean everything, will have its effect on what happens to you tomorrow. Wounds take much time to heal, and the larger the damage, the longer it takes for healing. You having Mabel was a severe blow for us as parents. Having people in town come up and say, I hear you're a grandpa. I didn't know your daughter was married. Then the hardest one, I thought your family was Christian. See, even the world knows that what you did is wrong, and they don't even know who the Father is. And that is why CPS was here, because they did know. It is because of your parents' stand that you still have Mabel, and that we were willing to help care for her, to see that she had a right home, etc. Now you have thrown that away. I realize John is a problem for you. I did not know how many times you had come together since Mabel, but I knew it was happening again. I saw the signs this time. No matter how much John may push, you still had to say yes. That makes you both guilty because you both know it is a sin, and more than that, it is even wrong according to the state. Getting away from temptation is good, and we have done our best to not allow the two of you to be in the house alone. But I could not stop the horse rides together. After all, both of you do what you want, when you want, whether we approve or not. Well, I could go on for 8 pages, but I doubt that it will do any more good than if I were to have written only a sentence. We will be praying for you and Mabel's salvation, that you will choose to be on God's side, because I can see that many around the world are making their choice either for heaven and striving every nerve to do right, or for Satan and just having a profession of godliness. May you choose Christ, the one who died for even you, Dad and Mom.
Heavy.
Yeah. So, that brought a lot of tears because I wanted my parents to understand that it wasn't me. And to this day, my dad still says, like, it takes 2 people. Like, he doesn't understand. Like, sometimes there's nothing you can do. Just, you get your body controlled by somebody else, and you just, it's like sometimes you're not even in your body. Somebody else is messing with it, and you're just, I don't know. So yeah, and I overheard my mom several times tell people that I was a slut and a whore. She told that to my face, that she said that that's what I was, and I could never understand because, I thought sluts and whores were the girls who went and sold their body, and I was like, I'm not on the street selling it, and I'm not I'm not
You're wearing dresses that go down to your ankles.
Yeah, and I mean, I didn't wear the long sleeves. That was kind of something she got into after right before I left home, was wearing long sleeves. But yeah, I had the long dresses and didn't show my ankles, and you know, I don't know. I was trying to do what was right, and still, yeah. So
Well, Miranda, I am incredibly proud and thankful to know you. A question that some people might have. So we've talked about Tara Westover's book, Educated, and the thing that really connected with me within that book was her family's still alive, and she's writing about these things. Your family is still alive,
yeah,
and it's a vulnerable thing to talk about this. Some people might be wondering, like, is there accountability? Is there law? What has happened that way?
yeah, like there has been no accountability. So I actually did try to get accountability. Um, I think like 8 or 9 years ago, I decided, hey, I'm gonna go see if I can get him put in jail for what he did to me. And the Idaho police said, so it happened in Washington State, where Mabel's born and all of that. And what the Idaho people said that in Washington, if the if the person who was raped is over 18 and the person is underage, it's considered that you're raping them, and that I could have gone to jail for being older than him, which to me that law seems so unfair because I wasn't raping him at all, like, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, he was the one that was always yanking my clothes off. I was never doing that to him. So that didn't seem fair. And I figured at the time I had a young family, had my other girls were very little, and I just didn't think the risks were worth it because I didn't want to end up in jail for especially something I didn't do and having young kids. So I decided just to let sleeping dogs lie, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And I met you in church, and as I started to hear the whole story, I was overcome by your resiliency. How is it that you came from that spiritual background to believe in a God that is love, that gives freedom?
Well, I think that's all your fault. Like all your amazing sermons, like I realized, hey, there is a God that actually does care and does love you and doesn't, he's not just up there like condemning everybody hell just because they made a mistake. Like he does, yeah, he does care. And sometimes I still have a hard time accepting like that. It is hard to it is hard to accept because when you've grown up your whole life believing that he doesn't care and that no matter how hard you work, like I grew up with my parents knowing that my mom's love was conditional and I never quite felt like I got it. But so I kind of correlated that to God. Like you had to work really hard, and if you worked super hard, then maybe you get a little bit of love, but not quite enough. And so accepting that you don't have to work for that love, that he does love you no matter what, it is hard.
Maybe final word, final thought. Tell us where we can get this book and ultimately why you wrote it and what you hope that people that might read it would gain from your experience.
Yeah, so I actually wrote it for therapy. I mean, I didn't intend on actually getting it published. For a while there, I was just writing out all my hate because for a long time I had a lot of hate and frustration, especially towards my mom, and writing it out really helped me let it go. So, like, now I don't feel any hate for her. In fact, it's kind of weird, but I actually feel sorry for her because I feel like how much hate and resentment she has, and I feel sorry for having to carry that around and like all her works. So I've been able to let the hate go, which is very freeing to not feel like you have that much hate towards your parent. I have no interest, like we don't have a relationship at all, and I have no interest in having a relationship just because I don't think it's possible to ever, unless she can change. But I also don't want my girls around that.
Mm-hmm.
Now I've forgotten your question.
And then where can we get the book if
Oh
people
yeah.
are interested?
So yeah, I wrote the book to get rid of all that resentment, and then hey, you encouraged me to turn it into a book, and so now it's on Amazon, and you can pick it up on there. It can, either an ebook or a not paperback copy, and then the hope is to be able to. I'm hoping to do an audiobook soon. So
Okay.
yeah.
Well, Miranda, I'm incredibly proud of you, thankful for our friendship. And two Bible texts stand out to me in regards to your experience. There's one, and it's 1 John 4:18. It says, "There is no fear in love, because perfect love casts out all fear."
True.
And you have this little baby girl that comes, and you know she is worth fighting for. And you didn't know what the next steps would be. You didn't know what freedom looks like. You didn't know even the level of dysfunction that you grew up in. But you went forward because of your little girl, and you wanted her to experience goodness. And she has now. You guys have created an environment, and you'll even say it's not perfect. Nobody's is. You're going to have flaws, all those things, but you're creating health, and you're giving a legacy that they can pass on. And it's really good that way. And then the other text, Jesus is speaking it to a group of religious hypocrites. And he says to them, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." And the truth that I believe in, and the God that I believe in, is that he loves every person. And as we embody that, and as we believe that, as opposed to condemnation, that sets us free to be our best selves. And I've seen the journey and your stories. For people that have not experienced it, would be unbelievable. But I think your story is testament to, even with the level of trauma and the background that you went through, there is a path forward. There's a journey out of darkness, and there's hope. And so
Yeah.
I'm thankful that you're willing to share. It's vulnerable. Your family's still alive. We've even had conversations around, like, what does this all mean? But it's your story. It's your truth, and you can own it to help set other people free. So thank you,
Yeah.
Miranda.
Thank you.
Thank you. It is an incredible story, Miranda.